Hello and welcome to this week's episode of #Leadership What's on Your Mind. Remember, we're a podcast to make you stop and think about your leadership journey, and we're going to add value by speaking to amazing people with amazing stories and experts in their field. So if you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel and you follow us on your podcast provider. So today I'm really excited. We've got a new country and location for a guest coming on the podcast. So I'll let Vix explain where she is. But we've got Vix today. Hi Vix, how are you doing?
Hello, I am very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's fun. I'm looking forward to this episode for lots of different reasons. We saw each other probably, we were just talking before we came on, didn't we? It was about 3 years ago, and that time lapse is a bit wary, but it's really nice to have you on. I really value that you're fit into that category of having like-minded people, and I've really enjoyed your thought process when we were talking about, like, back then we were talking about the branding and even before the podcast, all that sort of thing. So, and you're also ex-RAF as well, which will explain your story through that as well. So as I hit the 20-minute timer, could you tell us who you are, what you do, and where you are? Off you go.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take those in reverse. So I'm in Bali in Indonesia. I relocated here a year ago with my new husband. Probably one of those kind of like post-pandemic stories of how is it that I really want to live my life. So yeah, I've been out here for a year now. I am a somatic coach. I'm also an authentic relating facilitator. And I have a passion for cyclical wisdom, so understanding how we work with our natural cycles more. I'm also a recovering perfectionist, which I think will probably become the pertinence of that will probably become clear as we talk today. But I noticed just even your little introduction of talking to amazing people with amazing stories and experts. I was like, oh no, am I enough to be here? So yeah, that even with all the work that I've done, the perfectionism, it still continues to kind of sneak its way through from time to time. Hence, recovering perfectionist rather than an ex-perfectionist.
Do you know what? As we were emailing and setting this up and getting the time in, I spotted that on your signature block, and I have actually told a couple of people about that recently, because how relevant is that? And there's so many more people that can relate to that than you actually think. When you actually talk about it, they go, oh yeah, I can see that. But so we'll talk about that. So before we get carried away and chat, let's go to the questions. So I'll see what #leadership, what's on your mind. What comes to your mind when you hear the word leadership?
So I guess there's like two reactions that I have. One is, 9 months of training at Cranwell and a very particular style of leadership, one that is very active and directive, and let's make stuff happen. And then more recently, my personal work, my professional work is taking me more into this space of what I want to call today kind of feminist leadership, and this space of listening and allowing and embodiment and authenticity. And so yeah, the experience that I've had of two very different ways of leadership, and perhaps very different goals of leadership. The kind of the RAF adage, or the adage that reminds me of a sort of military style of leadership is, what do you call a man out for a walk? I'm going to mess this up now. The one about, if somebody's out for a walk with, you need followers to be a leader, right? You need to be going somewhere. You need to have people going with you. Sorry, I messed that up totally.
Don't worry.
Versus, yeah, almost kind of like leading from behind, and like what is needed, and where can I support people to do that, as opposed to kind of like leading from the front and, come on chaps, we're going this way. So yeah, that's my first response.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. And so staying with you personally, and you've already alluded to obviously joining the military and having that, was there anything before that? So we asked people, like, where do you think your leadership journey started? So was it on reflection? Now we're talking about it now, or was there a light bulb moment at the time? Like, how far back are we going?
I mean, my younger sister has described me as bossy for as long as I can remember. And like bossy is one of those words that little boys are never bossy. Yeah, they're assertive. Little girls who dare to have an opinion and be like, let's do this, are described as bossy. So I imagine that I have had some kind of, inclination towards leadership from a very early age. My father was a 1-star in the Air Force, a general. And so yeah, maybe I've been just kind of following in his footsteps ever since day zero. But I was head oh, this sounds so cliche now. I was head girl at prep school. I was head of house at boarding school. Yeah, there's something. I remember being asked when I went to the selection centre at Cranwell, why did I want to be an officer? And I remember the kind of like the dissonance in my own mind of like, why would I not want to be an officer? Like, of course I'm going to be a leader.
Yeah.
Well, the precociousness of it. Yeah, so
but
I guess
again, that sort of reminds me of that kind of your product of your environment. And when you're younger, you can't really do much about that because you're growing and you only see what you see, don't you? And you're influenced by what's around you. So that's a really good example of that. And why shouldn't you have that belief behavior? Because that's what you've seen, and that's in a positive way. Awesome. So we've recently been asking people about what has been a big influence on your leadership journey. So whether it be positive or negative, or an event or a person, what do you think? What if I was to pin you down and choose one thing that's had a really big impact on your leadership journey? What would you choose?
I'd say probably this kind of this step into the world of embodied practice, and learning to feel, like learning to kind of be with my own emotions, and to lead with authenticity. I think if I remember my leadership journey for a long time, I had a sense of the lesson that I had learned was it needed to look a certain way, right? And I remember actually one of my first flight commanders at Cranwell was like a big burly helicopter pilot, and for him leadership looked like, you stand in front of people, you shout quite loudly and stuff happens. And I was this little, like, 5'5", 8 stone weakling, who wanted to be an intelligence officer. Like, that was so not me. And I think I battled for that for a long time in the Air Force, of like how do I project the image that I think I should be projecting? And I think what I have come to more and more over the last couple of years has been this sense of, actually, what is it like to be deeply authentically me, and to lead from this place? And that has been just much less hard work, and way more effective in my view. And I see this, I do alongside my coaching, I still do a bit of diversity and inclusion consulting, and I really, the companies that I think are doing really well in the D&I space, but also just kind of generally, are leaders who are authentic, and they can admit that it's not going well, and they're open, they want feedback and they listen, and that's very different from stand in front of a bunch of people and yell at them until they do what you want to do.
Yeah, and again, just picking up on some of the threads that we've talked about on the podcast, I think there has been a real shift in leadership in the last 2-3 years. We talk about a shift in use of technology, and what the pandemic is, the fact that we can work from places like Bali and we can engage and have careers and these laptop lifestyles, etc. But I think there's been a real, you mentioned about the leadership of stand in front of people and tell people, there's the fact of that's not acceptable anymore. It's situational, we know, through the military side of things, but that's really interesting. So and again, you're operating in an environment and a world that I'm quite far away from, so this is why I'm really pleased about having you on and talking about it. So you mentioned about being a somatic coach.
Yes.
What is that?
What is that? So working somatically or in an embodied way basically for me means two things. So our patterns live in our bodies. They're the habitual ways that we are not just kind of mental constructs. They play out in our physical form. So that could be kind of like body posture, the way our nervous system reacts to stimuli. Like one of the ways, like my perfectionism, for example, really shows up for me is I lean forward a lot. Yeah, and there's a sense of like leaning into life, wanting to grab it and like direct it and do all the things out here. And so embodied practice helps me see that more clearly, so I can recognize when it's happening. And then crucially, we can then work with the body to develop a different way of being. Yeah, so if I'm always leaning forward, what is it like for me to learn to lean back a little bit and to trust that I can still get stuff done even when I lean back? And it's particularly relevant, I think, in the leadership space, because it gets talked about like charismatic leadership. Like there are leaders who intuitively get this, you know, the way that they are embodies leadership. But I think it's often talked about in this quite kind of like nebulous, like, oh, magical thing that some leaders are able to do. But it's deeply practical, and it lives in our soma, it lives in our body. And so rather than trying to kind of just change our mindset and rewire neural pathways, which is incredibly hard to do, it's quite easy to, you know, if you're somebody who, you know, you're in a meeting and you're trying to speak up, and the whole time you're like this and your shoulders are hunched over and, you know, you're not breathing very much. It's quite easy to notice that and to put your body in a different physical position and to notice how you feel differently, how that lets you speak with more volume. Yeah, rather than thinking, I must be more confident.
Yeah. I love that. And you just saying that then, I've, at the end of last year, one of my big reflections of the year was that the more I sort of relaxed and leant back, the more I was like practicing having a bit of patience. And in the early stages of growing the business and the podcast, it was very lean forward and push and drive and get things done, and that military mentality coming in then as well. So yeah, it's kind of something that I am learning now into this year, halfway through the year already, that it's actually shown up quite a lot more this year. So I love that. Excellent. So tell me about that. How does that help people? Like what I was going to say, what do people doing wrong, but I think we'll go more positively. So how is this having a positive impact on people in the leadership space and how they change their habits?
Yeah, so for me, this is all around choice. So to change, you need three parts really. There's awareness. You have to sort of notice that you're doing something in the first place. You then need tools. You need range. You know, like so many kind of self-development things I see take people to the stage of awareness, and all you end up with is now being twice as frustrated because now you know that you can't do something, but you don't have any. It's like telling somebody to calm down when they don't have any practices that actually help regulate their nervous system. It's like so useless and actually makes it worse. So there's awareness, there's range, and then that creates choice. And as you were just sort of alluding to there, it's not that any of this is wrong, but it's a sort of choice of this balance between how am I and how do I be authentic to myself in this situation, and be sensitive and responsive to the situation that I'm in. So when I have more choice, I can, you know, when I'm leading a workshop, for example, you know, if I'm noticing that everybody's energy is starting to slump, right? As a facilitator, I have range and tools, and I have choice in that moment to say, do I want to go with them? Right? You know, is what I'm feeling that people are getting full, and actually we need to slow down. People need a little bit of a break. We need to kind of move with that gentle energy for a little while. Or do I want to contrast that? You know, right, come on, like let's do some star jumps, like let's get something moving and really like lift the energy in the room up. And neither one of those is right or wrong, but a skilled leader has both self-awareness and social awareness, and is then able to self-regulate and then influence others with this intentional choice.
I love that. That just really well explains, because as you're talking about that, I'm already picturing some things that I get involved in, and some things that you hear and see other people, challenges, etc. So I know people will actually be able to see that in their lives and how it shows up. So tell me about, you have got a book coming out. So we're going to give a little promote to that. So what is the book? How can we sort of look out for it? And what's it all about?
Yeah, it's in the earlier stages that it doesn't have a title yet, and it's interesting. So the book is about perfectionism.
Okay.
It's a collection. I've curated a collection of things I have written over the past year and kind of turned that into a kind of a more coherent arc that really talks about my view of perfectionism, which is less about trying to be perfect all the time and more this kind of deep-seated belief of not being enough. And, you know, there's always more to give and never quite right. I'm always wrong is how I often experience it. And then how do you spot that? So how do you build the awareness? And then what's the alternative? Because for a long time, as I was approaching my perfectionism, it was coming from this place of, this is a problem that I have to fix. I am not enough of a person as a perfectionist. Which the irony of like trying to overcome or defeat or fix perfectionism is that is perfectionist thinking. It's like, I would be a better person if only I didn't have this major character flaw. Whereas I see perfectionism now as it's a nervous system strategy. You know, so for me, like, it kicks in like writing the book, for example, it was kicking off all over the place. Like every time I step outside my comfort zone, my nervous system is like, whoa, this could be risky. And it's like, oh, I know this thing has worked for me before. We're going to do the perfectionism thing. And so the book is like, well, if it's not trying to overcome perfectionism, what is an alternative? Sorry, my little kitten's going nuts in the background.
Don't worry.
Perfectly imperfect. So this kind of this move towards how do people cultivate a greater sense of wholeness and self-acceptance in this place of, actually, even if I never did another piece of self-development work, I never took another course, I am enough. And from that place, I can choose, like, yeah, I still really want to learn this thing, and I want to be able to, I'm learning to hula hoop at the moment. You know, learning to hula hoop is not going to make me a better person, but it's something that I want to do. And sort of navigating that difference. So yes, I'm having a little bit of perfectionism about the title, trying to get that right. And actually interesting, I got some feedback recently around a possible title which has proved very popular on social media and yet doesn't feel authentic. And so I'm really navigating the space at the moment of, like, do I do the right marketing thing and the thing that everybody else thinks I should do, or do I do the thing that feels right? So I'm kind of navigating that at the moment. But I'm planning to self-publish in late August. So
brilliant. So when this comes out, we'll put all the stuff on there as much as we can to point people in the right direction. But I just wanted, we've got a couple of minutes left. I can't believe this has gone so quickly. However, the fact that you had that recovering perfectionist on your signature block on the email, I just love that, because there's so many people that are listening that can probably relate to that. What some of the things can people start to do if they are in that perfectionist mindset and it's starting to trip them up and they know it's something that they need to maybe change? What are some of the things that people can do practically to sort of maybe nudge towards that journey that you're on, of like being more, as you were talking then, it reminded me of like the presence, like just being where you are now, because there's a lot of things I've consumed recently that were either in the past or the future, and how are we actually present? And I can relate that to that in my journey. But what would you say in the last couple of minutes just to help people move forwards?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's basically some form of kind of, I teach some of this to aid workers before they go to conflict zones. And I often say to people that there is, unless you're an aid worker in a conflict zone or a soldier and somebody's actually shooting at you, there is generally very little wrong in the present moment. Like, everything we're worried about is either, you know, post-match analyzing a conversation that we had and like, oh, did I do that right? Or I'm worried about not doing it right in the future. So something about coming to the present. And there's a practice that comes through authentic relating, which is, it's called welcoming everything. And the idea of it is that deep present moment noticing. And I often recommend people start with the level of sensation. So often we get really caught up in the stories in our heads, and the stories are important, but there's something objective about feeling a sensation in your body. Okay, my toes are cold. As we're recording this, it's like the hottest day of the year in the UK, so people's toes probably aren't cold, but whatever. So yeah, no, what is like the physical sensation? What emotions are present? And then, like what is my mind doing? And with this sense, so Ram Dass says that the world is perfect as it is, including my desire to change it. And so the practice of welcoming everything is like, how curious can you get about your own experience? Can you become like a connoisseur of all the different shades and flavors and hints of your own experience, to orientate towards it? So the practice of welcoming everything isn't to accept or to tolerate, but it's to first orientate towards reality. So like, this is what's happening for me right now. And in my experience, as soon as I do this, you're essentially tapping into what Richard Schwartz, the founder of internal family systems therapy, calls capital S self. And self is compassionate and curious and a whole other bunch of C words that Richard uses. But from that place, you're tapping into the power to be compassionate towards your own experience, to have some choice about how you respond. So the Viktor Frankl quote of that space between stimulus and response. And we create that for ourselves through this practice of noticing, welcoming everything. And then we, as soon as we're out of that, it brings us out of the stress response. But perfectionism is essentially a nervous system reaction. We're either into fight or flight or into freeze. And as soon as we can bring ourselves back to that kind of place of ventral vagal safety, we open up our capacity to be curious and creative and kind again. Stress makes us dumb, conservative, and mean, in the words of my teacher, Mark Walsh. It's not useful. It's not useful. Yeah. So coming back to the present, noticing what is, starts to bring us out of that stress response and allows us the opportunity to respond.
Amazing. What a great way to finish as well, because again, I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that can relate to a lot of the things we've talked about today, and I can't wait to hear the feedback about it, because again, it's really nice to sort of have a conversation at that level of sort of curiosity as well around leadership, and a completely different way of thinking as well, which I absolutely love. So Vix, thank you so much for your time. Ladies and gents, if you've enjoyed that, make sure you hit subscribe on the YouTube channel, make sure you follow us on your podcast provider, and pass it forwards, sharing your thoughts and your takeaways from this episode. So all the way from Bali, thank you so much again for your time, Vix.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next Wednesday at 6 a.m, another amazing guest will be coming on and sharing their stories or their expertise and adding value to your leadership journey. See you next week, guys. Bye.